This is entitled, Was Yaakov's struggle with the angel a foreshadowing of Purim? So let's dive in. We all know that in Parshat Vayishlach, the Torah uses very mysterious language. It talks about Yaakov struggling with this ish, this unknown person, and he struggles until dawn, until finally this ish asks to be released from whatever chokehold, and Yaakov wrestles a blessing from him. But what's interesting is that Rashi, of course, makes known the opinion in Rabbah that this Ish was the guardian angel of Esav. And of course, it all makes sense. Esav is the one who's coming the next morning with all his men, and Esav represents eventually Rome, that's going to destroy the Beit HaMikdash, and Esav even represents, as you know, the West today, Europe, America, Russia. So it's ongoing friction with the Jewish people throughout history. It's the galut, the final galut that we're still in. What's confounding is that there's another opinion in another collection of Midrash, which says, no, it wasn't the guardian angel of Esav at all. It was the very friendly, wonderful angel Michael, the one who's given many illustrious tasks in the Chumash. So how do we make sense of that? So there's an opinion, a commentator in the Midrash called Matnat Kuhuna, and he gives the answer. He says, this was all something designed to give chizuk, to give more confidence to Yaakov because of his impending fight with his brother who's coming towards him with armed men the next morning. This is going to give him the strength and resolve. If he can beat an angel, certainly he can, nothing to worry about in the struggle with his brother. But if you examine that, it sort of sounds like no matter who this angel really was, God was, so to speak, manipulating events just so that Yaakov will have more courage and less fear of his impending fight with his brother. In fact, the Midrash uses an example to prove this. It says, gives an analogy of a king that hired uses the word athlete, an athlete to teach the prince how to wrestle. And while they're wrestling, this athlete is about to pin the prince. He looks up and sees that the king is watching, so he falls back and allows himself to be, allows the prince to, so to speak, tackle him or wrestle him down. And the same is true in the other collection of Midrash, which says that it's Michael. It uses a term, tushash kocho, that he was weakened. Either it means he pretended to be weak, or God made Michael weak. Either way, so to speak, God sort of threw the fight, and the angel loses, Yaakov wins. And now the question is, we have this famous dictum in the Torah, Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, everything that happens to our forefathers foreshadows what happens later. So how do we look at this event? So yes, Yaakov is trying his hardest, but if it wasn't for the active involvement of God, he would not have won. Is this really the way our history will unfold? And if you look at the Purim story, you'd have to say a resounding yes, and that's not a bad thing. So if you look at the Purim story, the question you have to ask is, in other words, is this another scenario where we think we were in control, just like Yaakov thought he was winning with his strength? And in the Purim story, we also thought we were in control, but we really weren't. Look at the plan that Mordechai proposed, right? He told Esther that, you of course were brought to this illustrious position as queen for a reason. You got to go in and beg Achashverosh to annul the decree. Now, as we see, Esther didn't even try to carry out that plan. She didn't think that plan would work. She came out with a more sophisticated plan based on the human foibles, and she wanted to, of course, make Achashverosh jealous, and by inviting them both to the party, so that when she finally made her accusation, the king would get so mad he would kill her. But would that plan have actually worked? Did Esther think that she was in control, but really wasn't? Well, if we look at the facts, I guess we'd have to conclude that it is, what we said originally, that Yaakov is wrestling with the angel, is really a foreshadowing, because Esther's plans may not have worked. The famous statement when Haman comes in the middle of the night to the kingdom, to the palace of Achashverosh, because his wife just gave him this great idea that he should hang Mordechai, and the famous words, "Balaylahu nadadash nasamelach," right? And the Midrash there in Esther says that Hamelach means God. God was stirring up the pot. So he comes in, and before he can get a word out, the king says to him, "What would you do to someone who the king finds favor with?" And of course he goes on. He says, put that person on the king's horse and the king's men and the king's criers. And the king says, do all that to Mordechai. Now, of course, what was going on here? This was really one of the turning points in the story, because here you have an event which really psychologically damaged Haman, so that eventually, when he got to that fateful moment, and Esther accused him of being the one who was trying to murder her people, he couldn't defend himself, which is very strange. He was the number 2 guy in the whole world, right? Achashverosh ruled over the whole world. And you'd think he couldn't come up with something smooth to say. He couldn't blame it on someone. He couldn't act like he was very angry and what a mistake, what a terrible thing. It's so-and-so's fault. Why couldn't he do it? Because he lost his confidence, because he had to go through the streets, and it was so traumatic for him. His arch enemy Mordechai had to go through the streets yelling, "This is what the king does to the person he finds favor with." And so God, as I said, weakened him emotionally so that he wasn't prepared, and he couldn't handle this impending accusation of Esther. So you see that without God's intervention, Esther's plan may not have worked. And of course, you have other midrashim that Haman ended up in a compromising position where he fell on the bed that Esther was lying on. How did that happen? Because an angel pushed him. And in the final scene, you have Chavona, who happens to be in the right place in the right time, and points out, "Hey, isn't that the tree that Haman wanted to hang Mordechai on?" And of course, Achashverosh couldn't resist the irony, and he said, "Yes, let's hang him on it." And real final nafochu. So, as it all turns out, it's doubtful that the plans that certainly Mordechai and even Esther had in mind would have worked without the intervention of God. Let us therefore be constantly aware and continually thankful to God that as long as we are playing our part, God will intervene. And indeed, the struggle of Yaakov with the angel was a paradigm for the way Jewish destiny will unfold.